My name is Wes Tucker. I'm 38 years old, and I'm the superintendent of a 6-story walk-up on Cypress Street, the kind of building where the radiators knock all winter, and somebody's always locked out. I live in the basement unit, rent-free, which is most of what they pay me. I fix what breaks. Boilers, drains, the front door buzzer that's been dying for a year. I'm good with my hands because hands were the only thing nobody could take away from me. I learned to fix things in a group home when I was 13, and I've been fixing things ever since, in one place or another, alone. I should tell you how I grew up, because the rest of this won't make sense otherwise. I came up in the system. Foster homes, group homes, a couple of families that kept me until the check stopped being worth the trouble, then a couple that didn't even last that long. I aged out at 18, with a trash bag of clothes and a bus pass. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand what I believed about myself by the time I was 38. I believed I was the kind of man who doesn't get a family. Not because anybody's cruel about it, just because I'd learned, the way you learn a thing in your bones and not your head, that I was somebody people kept for a while and then didn't. So I stopped letting anybody keep me. I got there first. I left before the leaving could be done to me. 40 years old was coming up fast, and I figured I'd spend it the way I'd spent all the rest of them. Quiet, by myself, fixing what broke for other people and going back down to the basement. Then a woman on the 3rd floor asked me to marry her, and I nearly said no, and the only reason I didn't is the reason this whole story exists. Before I get to it, let me say one thing straight to you, because I've come to learn these stories land hardest on the people who felt it. If you've ever stood on the outside of that word, family, and figured it just wasn't meant for you, stay with me tonight. This one's for you especially. And if it gets to you the way it gets to me, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to DreamHearts Stories, because we make these for the people the world forgets to keep. Alright, let me tell you about Maya and Theo Castillo. They were in 3B. I knew them the way a super knows everybody, which is to say I knew their leaky faucet and their stuck window and the sound of their door. Maya Castillo was 33 and worked harder than anyone I'd ever met. Days she was a home health aide, driving around to old folks who needed help bathing and remembering their pills. 3 nights a week, she waited tables at a diner over on Lincoln. I'd see her come in past midnight, dead on her feet, and be back out the door at 7. She was the kind of tired that I recognized, the tired that isn't about sleep. And then there was Theo. Theo was her younger brother, 15 years old, and he had Down syndrome, and he was, without any competition, the most alive person in that whole building. Theo loved lucha libre, Mexican wrestling, the masks, the flying off the ropes, the good guys and the bad guys, all of it. He had a closet of masks in every color, and he wore one most days, pushed up on his forehead like sunglasses. The first real conversation I ever had with Theo. He caught me carrying a pipe wrench through the lobby and informed me, very seriously, that I had the build of a Technico, which is a good guy wrestler, and that I needed a name. He decided my name was El Martillo, the hammer, because of the wrench. From that day on, I was El Martillo to Theo, and he'd invented a handshake to go with it, an elaborate thing, a slap and a grip, and a knock of the fists, and then both hands thrown up like we'd just won the belt. I'm not a man who hugs, but I learned that handshake, and every time I saw that kid in the lobby we'd do it, the whole production, and for about 4 seconds I'd feel like somebody. I didn't know how much that kid had already worked his way into me, until the day I almost lost the chance to know him better. Their mother had passed when Theo was 8. Cancer, fast. I'd heard that much. Maya had been 24, and she'd taken Theo and raised him herself ever since. and as far as I could tell, their father had been gone so long he was barely a rumor. That was the whole family. Just the two of them, in 3B, and a kid who'd made a stranger with a wrench into a wrestler, so he'd have one more person on his side. It was a Tuesday in February, when Maya knocked on the basement door. That alone was strange. Tenants called. They didn't come down to the basement. She stood there in her Aide scrubs with her coat still on and her hands wringing the strap of her bag, and she looked like she'd been crying and had decided to stop. She asked if she could come in. I cleared a chair. She sat down, and she didn't touch the coffee I made her, and she stared at the floor for a long time. Then she lifted her head and looked at me dead on and said the thing she'd come to say before she could lose her nerve. "Wes," she said, "I need to ask you something insane, and I need you to let me finish before you answer." She took a breath. "I need you to marry me. For 6 months. On paper, that's all. 6 months and then we end it and you go back to your life, and I'll owe you for the rest of mine. I want to be honest about what happened in me, because it's the part I'm not proud of. My whole body went cold and flat, the way it does, the old reflex. No, not no because it was crazy. No, because the word marriage had landed on a man who'd spent 38 years being sure that word wasn't for him, and the wall went up so fast it was nearly a wall before she'd finished talking. I opened my mouth to tell her she had the wrong man, that I wasn't the marrying kind, that I wasn't any kind, that she needed somebody who knew how to be somebody's anything, and she saw it. She saw the no forming, and she said, quietly, "Please, just let me tell you why." And then she told me. The aunt's name was Diane, Maya's late mother's older sister. She lived 3 states away, in a big house with a husband who'd done well, and for 7 years she'd been a Christmas card and nothing more. But 6 weeks ago, Diane had filed a petition for guardianship of Theo. The papers said all the right things. They said Diane could provide a stable, 2-parent home. They said she had the resources to give Theo the therapies and the schooling and the future a boy like him deserved. They said, in the careful, cruel language of those papers, that Maya was a single woman working multiple jobs, frequently absent, financially unstable, and unable to provide the supervision and stability that a child with Theo's needs required. They were going to argue that Maya loving him wasn't enough, that love doesn't show up on an income statement. There was a home evaluation coming, a court date after that, and Maya's lawyer, the free one the county gave her, had been straight with her. A judge looking at a single woman who's gone 16 hours a day versus a married couple in a 5-bedroom house with a college fund already started. That judge is going to think he's doing Theo a favor by sending him to Diane. Unless something changed, unless Maya could show the court she wasn't doing it alone. A spouse, a second income, even a small one, another adult in the home, a stable, 2-parent household. The exact words off Diane's own petition turned around. 6 months, Maya said. The evaluation, the hearing, the ruling. That's all it takes. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you for anything but your name on a license and your presence in that apartment, so that when the woman from the court comes, she sees a family, instead of a single mother she's already decided to pity. I asked you because Theo trusts you. I asked you because you're the only man I've ever seen him let all the way in. She stopped. Her voice finally broke. They want to take him to Arizona, Wes. He's never spent a night away from me. He doesn't understand what's happening. And I cannot, I will not, let them put my brother in a car and drive him away from the only home he's ever known, because some judge decided I wasn't enough on my own. And there it was. The one thing I could not say no to, because I knew that car. I had been the kid in that car. Different state, different reason. Same back seat, watching the only place I knew get small in the window, while strangers decided it was for my own good. More resources. More stability. A better future. They'd said those exact words over me, and they'd been wrong, and there had been no one, not one single person, who'd loved me enough to stand in front of that car and refuse. Theo had someone. He had Maya, and it had just turned out he might have me. I didn't answer her with a speech. I'm not a speech man. I just said, "When's the wedding?" We got married 11 days later at the county courthouse on my one morning off. She wore a blue dress. I wore the only collared shirt I owned. Theo was our witness, in a silver mask, and when the clerk pronounced us, he threw both hands in the air like I'd taught him, and let out a victory yell that made the whole office laugh. And that was the only joyful sound in a marriage that was supposed to be made of paperwork. I moved up to 3B that weekend. We were careful and clear about it, the way you have to be. I took the little room that had been a storage room. We made rules. It was pretend. It was for Theo. In 6 months, win or lose, we'd undo it, and I'd go back down to the basement, and we'd stay friends, and nobody would ever have to know it hadn't been real. She thanked me about 40 times. I told her to stop. I told her I wasn't doing her a favor. I didn't fully explain what I meant, that a man who's never belonged anywhere doesn't do you a favor by getting to belong somewhere for 6 months. He's the one being done the favor. I just couldn't find a way to say it that didn't crack my voice, so I said it with a wrench instead, the way I say everything. The kitchen drawer that had been broken for a year, I fixed it the first night. The window that stuck. The buzzer. By the end of the first week, 3B worked better than it had in years, and that was my whole vocabulary for thank you for letting me in. I didn't understand yet that I'd just started the only 6 months that would ever matter. Here's what nobody tells you about pretending to be a family. You can't do it halfway, not with a kid in the house, so you just start actually doing the things, and the things don't know they're pretend. I started making breakfast, because Maya was gone by 7, and Theo needed somebody to make sure he ate before the bus. Pancakes, mostly. Theo liked them shaped like masks, which is harder than it sounds. I started being there when he got home, because Maya wasn't, and a 15-year-old shouldn't come home to an empty apartment. We watched lucha together. He educated me, at length, on every wrestler, every feud, every move. He decided we were a tag team. The Hammer and his wrestler name was El Cometa, the Comet. And a tag team needs a finisher, and a handshake, and a code. And we built all of it, sitting on that worn-out couch while the radiator knocked. And down in the basement, in the old storage room nobody used, I built him something. I didn't tell Maya for 2 weeks. I cleared it out. I put down a square of old wrestling mats I found cheap. I hung a heavy bag. I screwed a single turnbuckle into the corner just for show. A training room. The first time I brought Theo down and turned on the light, that kid went so quiet I thought I'd done something wrong. Then he looked up at me through the eye holes of his mask and said, "Nobody ever built me anything before, and I had to go fix a pipe that didn't need fixing so he wouldn't see my face." Nobody ever built me anything before either, Theo. I almost said it. I didn't. But I knew right then I was in trouble. The good kind and the bad kind both. Because I'd stopped being able to remember which parts of this were supposed to be pretend. Maya saw it happening. She'd come home past midnight and find me asleep on the couch with the lucha still playing and Theo asleep against my arm. And she'd wake me gentle, and we'd stand in the kitchen whispering so we didn't wake him, and we'd talk. Really talk. She told me about her mother. I told her things I'd never told a living soul, about the trash bag and the bus pass, about the families that didn't keep me. She didn't do the pity face. She just listened, like what I was saying was worth the hearing, One night she said, "You'd have been a good dad, Wes. You know that?" And I said something to make it a joke, because the truth of it went through me like a blade. The home evaluator came in March and saw exactly what she was supposed to see. A man making mask-shaped pancakes. A boy who called him El Martillo. A home. She wrote it down. It wasn't even a lie anymore. That was the problem. The closer we got to the hearing, the worse I got. Not better. Worse. You'd think a man would be happy. I had everything I'd spent my whole life telling myself I'd never have. A wife, even a paper one, who looked at me like I was worth looking at. A kid who'd built a whole world to put me inside of. A place at a table. And it scared me so bad I could hardly breathe, because I knew how it ended. I always knew how it ended. The 6 months would be up. The hearing would happen. We'd win or we'd lose, and either way the deal was the deal, and I'd go back down to the basement, and they'd go on being the Castillos without me, and the only thing worse than never having had a family was getting one for 6 months and then handing it back. So I started doing the thing I do. I started leaving before I could be left. I pulled back. I made excuses to be down in the basement. I told myself it was for the best, that I was getting them and me ready for the ending, that it was kinder to start the goodbye early. I skipped a couple of breakfasts. I told Theo I was too busy to train one night, and I watched his face do a thing I'll regret until I die. That flat, careful thing a kid's face does when he's learning not to expect you. I knew that face. I'd worn that face. And I put it on him anyway, because I was a coward, because 38 years of bracing for the leaving had taught me to do the leaving myself. Maya caught me at it. Of course she did. She came down to the basement one night, furious in that quiet way of hers, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said I didn't know what she meant. She said, "You know exactly what you're doing. You're leaving early. You're teaching him you're already gone, so it hurts less when you are," she said. "I have spent his whole life protecting that boy from people who decide ahead of time that he's too much trouble to stay for, and I will not." She stopped, and her voice dropped, and she said the thing that took the legs out from under me. "I didn't ask you to marry me because Theo trusts you, Wes. I mean, I did, but that's not why I asked you. I asked you because somewhere in the last 3 years I started watching for your light under the basement door, and I told myself it was about Theo because that was safer for both of us. But you're not pretending to be part of this family. You are part of this family, and you're about to do to him, and to me, exactly what was done to you. So don't, for once in your life, don't get there first." I didn't have an answer. I'd never had anyone ask me to stay. I didn't know the shape of the words. She waited, and I said nothing, frozen the way I freeze. And she finally nodded, like she'd gotten her answer in my silence, and she went back upstairs. And I sat in that basement with the heavy bag I'd hung for a kid I'd been pulling away from. And I understood that I was about to lose the only thing I'd ever been afraid to want, and that this time, for once, the leaving would be all my own fault. The hearing was on a Thursday. I almost didn't go. I'll tell you that because it's true. I sat in the basement that morning in my one collared shirt, and I thought, they're better off. A judge takes one look at a foster system, nobody with a record of leaving, and he hands the kid to Arizona on principle. I'm the weak link. The best thing I can do for them is not show up, and not be a thing the other side can use. That's the lie fear tells you, that your leaving is a gift. I'd believed it my whole life. Then my phone buzzed, a photo, from Maya's number, but it was Theo who'd sent it, because Theo had figured out the phone. It was a picture of the 2 masks, El Martillo and El Cometa, side by side on the couch where we'd left them. No words. He's 15, and he didn't have the words. But I knew exactly what he was saying. Tag team. You're up. Don't leave me in the ring alone. I made the courthouse in 20 minutes. It was going badly when I got there, and it kept going badly. Diane's lawyer was good, and Diane's house was big, and the numbers were all on a screen for the judge to see. The income gap, the hours Maya worked, the square footage. Then the lawyer turned to the marriage, and I understood this had been his plan all along. He laid it out cold. The respondent, he said, was unmarried and unstable until precisely 6 weeks after my client filed her petition. Then, suddenly, conveniently, she married the building superintendent, a man with no prior relationship to her on record, a man who moved into her unit days before the home evaluation. He let it hang there. He didn't have to say the word sham. He'd built it so the judge would say it to himself. A marriage of convenience, manufactured to defeat the petition. He asked the court to see it for what it was, and Maya's free lawyer didn't have much to come back with, because everything the man said was technically true. The judge looked at me over his glasses. He asked me to take the stand. And I want you to understand the choice I had in that second, walking up to that chair. I could try to sell it. I could pretend harder, lay the romance on thick, swear we'd been in love for years, and maybe a kind judge lets it go. That was the play. That was what the 6 months had been for. I sat down, and I put my hand on the book, and I looked at Theo sitting next to his sister, in a clip-on tie with his mask pushed up on his forehead, watching me, his tag team partner, finally in the ring. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't build one more lie in a room that was deciding his life. So I did the only thing I had left, the thing that had never once worked out for me before. I told the truth. "Your Honor," I said, "that lawyer's right. 6 weeks ago, I wasn't married to anybody. Maya came to me and asked me to marry her so the court would see a stable home, and I said yes, and on paper, that's exactly the convenient little arrangement he's describing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you we'd been sweethearts for years. We hadn't." The lawyer started to smile. Maya closed her eyes, but I kept going. I said, "Here's the part he doesn't know. I grew up in foster care. I aged out at 18 with a garbage bag and a bus pass, and not one person on this earth who'd decided to keep me. When I was a kid, somebody sat in a chair like this and decided that strangers with more money could give me a better future than the only home I knew, and they put me in a car and drove me away from it, for my own good, and they were wrong, and there was nobody, who loved me enough to stand up and stop it." The room had gone very quiet. I said, "I married Maya Castillo as an arrangement. I'm not going to lie to you about how it started, but I've made that boy breakfast every morning for 4 months. I built him a place to be himself, when the world keeps telling him to be smaller. He calls me El Martillo, and he made me his tag team partner, and I didn't know until I had it what that word even meant. You want to know if it's a real family? I'll tell you the truest thing I know. It started as paper. It is not paper now. That boy is the first person in 38 years who ever decided to keep me, and I would rather you put me back out on the street with a garbage bag than sign one order that takes him away from his sister. You can call that convenient if you want. I call it the only real thing I've ever had. I was done. I didn't know if I'd just saved them or sunk them. Telling the truth had never saved me before. Then a small voice said, "Can I talk?" It was Theo. He'd stood up. The judge, to his enormous credit, leaned forward and said, "Son, would you like to tell me something?" And Theo walked himself right up to the front, mask still pushed up on his forehead, and he turned to the judge and he said, in his own words, slow and certain, that he didn't want to go to Arizona, that Arizona was far, that El Martillo built him a ring and makes pancakes shaped like masks and is his tag team, that a tag team can't break up, And I lost it completely. Right there in a court of law. He looked at me, and he did the handshake, alone, in the air. The slap and the grip and the knock, and both hands thrown up to the sky like we'd just won the belt. So the judge could see what we were. You don't fake that. No lawyer alive can argue with that. The judge denied the petition. He said some careful legal things, but underneath them he said the only thing that mattered, which was that this court would not remove a child from a home where he was, plainly, loved and known and seen. Diane left without looking at us. I've come to feel less anger at her than I expected. I think she believed money was the same as love, because nobody had ever shown her the difference. That's its own kind of poverty. We didn't undo the marriage at 6 months. I'd love to tell you there was a big romantic moment, but the truth is, it was quieter than that. The night of the hearing, after Theo finally crashed, Maya and I stood in the kitchen the way we always did, whispering so we wouldn't wake him. And I said the words I'd never once in my life said to another person. I said, I don't want to go back to the basement. I said, I know how it started. I don't care how it started. I want to stay, if you'll keep me. I'd spent 38 years making sure nobody could leave me, by never letting anybody hold me. And I stood in that kitchen, and I let myself be held, and I asked to be kept, out loud, like a man. Maya put her hand on the side of my face, and she said, You've been part of this family since the morning you made him a pancake shaped like a mask. We were just waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice. We stayed married. For real this time, though the paper never changed, just the men holding it. It's been 6 years. I'm still the super on Cypress Street, but we knocked the wall through between 3B and the empty unit next door, and I did the work myself. And now there's room for all of us. Maya went back to school. She's a social worker now. She works with foster kids, the ones in the system, the ones in the car looking out the back window. And she is the person I needed and never had, and I get to be married to her, which is a thing I still don't fully believe on certain mornings. Theo is 21. He works at the rec center 3 days a week, and he runs a little after-school lucha program for kids. And he is, no exaggeration, the most beloved person in this entire neighborhood. The training room in the basement is a real thing now, with real mats, and on Saturday mornings it's full of kids in cheap masks, and El Martillo is in heavy demand as a referee. Theo still calls me that. He still makes me do the handshake. I will do that handshake until my arms don't work anymore. Sometimes Maya catches me just watching the two of them, Theo and whatever kid he's teaching to fall safe, and she knows what I'm thinking without me saying it, which is that somewhere out there is a 13-year-old in a group home, learning to fix things alone, because it's the only thing nobody can take from him, sure all the way down in his bones that he's the kind of person who doesn't get kept. And I want to find that kid and tell him he's wrong. That's mostly what I do now, in the small ways a man can. I try to be, for whoever's around, the person who stands in front of the car. People ask me sometimes what I did to deserve it. The whole life, handed to a man who'd written himself off, and I tell them the truth, which is that I didn't deserve it any more or less than anybody. I didn't earn this family. A tired woman knocked on a basement door and asked me for a favor, and the only halfway decent thing I did was not say no, and then the only brave thing I did, months later, was not run when staying got real. That's the whole of it. Everything good I have came from those two things, saying yes to a stranger's impossible ask, and then, when every instinct I owned told me to leave first, staying. Because here's what 38 years alone taught me wrong, and what one boy in a silver mask taught me right. Family isn't the people you started with. Plenty of us didn't get to keep those, through no fault of our own, and there's no shame in it, whatever they told you. Family is the people who decide to keep you, and the ones you're brave enough to let. It doesn't care how it started. It doesn't care what the paperwork says or how late in your life it shows up, or how sure you were that it wasn't coming. It only asks one thing of you, that when it finally arrives, in whatever strange disguise, you don't get there first. You don't leave before you can be left. You stay in the ring. So if you're out there tonight, on the outside of that word, telling yourself you're the kind of person who doesn't get a family, that you missed your shot at it, that you're too far gone, or too far down, or too alone, I want a man who believed every one of those things to tell you that you might be wrong. I was. You don't know who's about to knock on your door with an impossible question. You just have to be brave enough, when they do, to not say no, and braver still to stay. Because no matter where you started, no matter how many times you weren't kept, no matter how sure you are that it isn't meant for you, you are someone worth keeping. A kid in a wrestling mask taught me that. I just had to stop running long enough to learn it.